This time, Scott and I are filling in some gaps. Most of the time we've been talking about the British scenes or various American scenes. Now we're going over to Europe, and we're going to do another thing specifically on like a broader picture of European metal, because it's obviously not all Germany, but this time we're focusing in on Germany. And in part, the motivation for this is, as metalheads who grew up in the 70s and 80s, there were two German bands early on who were a major part of the metal scene outside of Germany, and that was first the Scorpions and then Accept. And then there were other bands as well, obviously, that played a big role. But those two, if you think about like a vinyl collection, or riding around in somebody's car and the tapes that used to be in those tape cassette holders,
Right.
and what would be the representative stuff in there, like you'd have an Iron Maiden one and a Judas Priest one and maybe Rat, but you'd have the Scorpions and you'd have Accept, at least Balls to the Wall, or Worldwide Live, or Love at First Sting or something like that. So they were in that sort of framework, we can say. But there is also a distinctively German metal scene that's developing, you could say, really in the mid to late 70s and then well into the 80s. And then there's, as we were talking about before we got started, there's this massive explosion of all different metal bands and types of metal. And I think there's a lot of interconnections between that and what was going on also in Scandinavia, which deserves its own treatment. So that's why we wanted to do this particular session. And German metal can be viewed as part of a larger European scene. But as we're going to talk about, the key players in this also conceived of what they were doing as being something global, something not distinctively German, or as they like to say, Teutonic. Right? Now, it's a little bit different. I want to say one proviso before we jump into this. It's a little bit different with the German thrash scene, where, in the early 80s, you've got some pretty important bands and there is a distinctive sound, but it's not just distinctive. It's not just confined to Germany, Austria, even the Czech, at that time, Czechoslovakia. There's some back and forth stuff, and Switzerland play a role in that. So we're going to do a whole discussion of that when we talk about thrash metal in some other session. So if you're where is that stuff? That's why we're putting that off. The German metal scene, for those of us, like I mentioned, who grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I see that we have some members here who definitely fit that demographic profile. It's one that was familiar to metalheads in that time, but it was also, in many respects, the ins and outs of it were unknown. Scott and I were talking about this yesterday in another conversation. The difference between the access that we have to bands today through the internet, or even before that, when there was a lot more music reporting, compared to, say, the early 80s, you really had no idea what was going on with these bands, Circus and Hit Parader, or if you were able to get Kerrang or something like that. I mean, we couldn't get that in the drugstores where I got my music magazines. As Scott was pointing out to me yesterday, those articles were like pre-approved. You weren't going to get a lot of inside dope, or interviews that are very revealing. And where I grew up, I would go to this record store in Brookfield Square, and they had one single section for metal imports. And that was where you'd find out about these bands that you'd never heard of. And, you'd look at the album cover and that would tell you a bit, and you'd look at the back and there'd be like song titles, but you'd be like, I don't know if this is any good or not. And, the imports were usually kind of expensive. So I didn't buy a lot. I got exposed to some of these bands through tape swapping, through people that I knew saying, hey man, you should listen to this, and they had a better collection than I did. And I don't know, what was it like for you, Scott, in terms of like getting, I mean, obviously the Scorpions, we heard them on the radio, right? And Accept, you'd sometimes hear them on the radio, but what about these? Did you have any exposure to these other bands at all, or?
It's interesting. My stories, I grew up in a town that didn't have MTV. We didn't have cable.
Okay.
So I was the only metalhead in my school. So everybody was a deadhead in, the 80s. They were all like into Neil Young. And if you went to a party, Neil Young would be playing, and I was the only one buying, like, the Def Leppard records and all this stuff. But the people that were on MTV, but the Scorpions were on MTV,
Yeah.
except of course. And so unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of tape swapping for me, because nobody listened to metal in my school. So there was one guy, one kid that listened to metal a lot, and actually he was good at kind of like, he would bring me a tape once in a while. Actually, he was the only one, and he would say, "Hey, this is the new whatever," and I go home. But I guess the difference between then and now is I'd listen to it, but I'd want my own copy, so you know
Oh yeah.
I'd mow the lawns, and like records were $7 or $8 back then.
Yeah.
So I got my $8, went, had my mom bring me when I was like not old enough to drive, and we would I get that record, and I just, that was a badge of honor back then. It's very different now.
Yeah. This is another thing that you and I were talking about yesterday in sort of our pre-show conversation.
Yeah.
And I think pretty much everybody in our audience right now can relate to this as well. When you got a new album, you listen to the whole thing, or a new tape, right? You listen to the whole thing. It wasn't. Today we're in a very different sort of format where people are, I'll stream this song and maybe it'll be part of a playlist or something, but they won't necessarily listen to an entire album, and they won't do it attentively necessarily. It might be while multitasking, and there was less going on when we were young.
Consider, not to stop you, I'm sorry, but
yeah, go ahead.
Consider the fidelity. I mean, and I've said this in past shows where, with our age group, the 70s and 80s, what do you call? The standard was having the receiver, the turntable, the tape deck, the nice speakers. So when you bought an album, you heard the low end, you heard the bass guitar, you heard everything. And now people will like just listen to it like on an MP3 format, which is far
and through headphones, like earbuds,
or just on their phone.
Yeah,
they'll just play their phone. And that was maybe our AM radio, I guess. But AM, was like, low fi, but
or our Walkmans,
those were great. The Walkmans was analog tape, and the louder you turned it up, the fatter the sound got. And now with digital, if you turn MP3s up, you just ruin your hearing.
Okay. Yeah.
So the listening experience is different, of course, but I think that's kind of the thing now. It's, not to hijack this for a second into technology, but this is a sore point with me, but it's like technologies in the music is convenience over quality. So
there's another aspect of this too that's a broader topic. You don't know what you don't know a lot of the time, and so if you haven't been exposed to hearing music in a format that has like the low end and a higher fidelity, you don't know what you're missing, right? You think that, well, that's just it. And actually, I think a lot of bands could suffer as a result. You're playing their stuff and you're like, well, I don't know, why do people say that they're good? It doesn't sound that good to me. So that could be a significant issue.
And also the trend of, speaking of German bands, I was telling Greg yesterday that I had the Accept Live album with Udo from '85, which would be the Metal Heart Tour, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah.
So I lost the CD, and so I rebought it, but it came with 2 CDs, the full show. And listening to that CD from back in the day, they didn't over compress. What I mean is, so if you take an album and mix it, they master the album. Now, what happened in the last 10, maybe 15 years is the A&R guy or woman would say, I want our band to be louder than the other bands. And so what would they do? They would over compress the album and it becomes white noise. I don't know if anybody's bought a record in the last, or a CD in the last 10 years. And it's kind of like, no matter where it is, you hear white noise, it's over compressed. And getting that live show, I could turn my stereo up because I have a volume knob, and even with the CD, it was just fat and warm. And so the trends themselves are just kind of like, it became a volume war.
You know, I was just reading an interview today with one of the band members of one of the bands that we're going to look at shortly, and he was talking about the new wave of traditional heavy metal and why that's taking off. And also, I'm going to read it right here. This is Marcus Berger of the band Trance, which was at one time looked at as like one of the big three. We think of the Scorpions, except, but Trance was sort of poised to become as important as them in terms of German
Right.
heavy metal. So he said, here's the question. What do you think about the renewed interest for traditional heavy metal? It seems a new golden age for this kind of music. And Berger said, it's a logical result and a stream against the power overdosed and high compressed new metal music. Even the hardest rock song has to breathe and show many facets of emotion to stay long time interesting after it's blown you away by first listening. Also, the modern drop tuning of the guitars gives a different, darker feeling to the music. Traditional heavy metal doesn't need these tricks and gives you a much more powerful, positive, and high feeling just with normal tuning. And I think that's a very interesting
I
set
agree.
of reflections, right? Go
It's
ahead.
fantastic. And you had that queued up. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, all the bands, well, with the German bands, Scorpions, Worldwide Live, the I had the vinyl, and
Mhm.
the louder I turned it up at my parents' house when I was young,
That must have been a treat for them.
and the neighbors. But I was playing air guitar, so but it was an experience, I would say. So, but now, like you play something on your cell phone, it's in the background. It's like
Yeah.
and but I try to tell people it's kind of like the experience aspect. It's not over compressed. There's room to breathe with dynamics. Well, even take Dio, for example, like Last in Line, it starts off kind of soft. And then when it builds, you hear it go up.
Yeah.
Well, what's the Scorpions ballad that came out on Love at First Sting? Da, 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 da.
Still, is it Still Loving You, or was that
Yeah,
on Blackout?
no, that's Still Loving You. You're right.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I remember having that record, and it started off soft, and then it would get louder. So it wasn't compressed in the sense that
The
what I mean by
dynamics. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the compression gets rid of the dynamics.
There's a couple songs on that particular album. The one that is, I think, at the very end of the album, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it starts out with just the guitar and soft drumming. Crossfire, I think. Living in the Crossfire.
Oh,
There's a few songs on that album that are doing that are playing with dynamics quite well.
and
Um,
metal, of course. I mean, especially in that era, well, you don't want to hear something that when it's soft, it's as loud as when the band builds up. You
yeah,
know,
true. Yeah.
so I think that quote is great that you had up. I would love to hear more of that from these artists.
Yeah, I mean, let's actually talk. So we're going to come back to some other issues that we had sort of on the docket lined up. But actually, let me also take this comment from Mark too. He says, "If I could afford all the equipment, I'd love to start a vinyl collection." I think, wouldn't we all? But it's expensive, isn't it,
Well,
to do that? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
I mean, it was expensive. It's as expensive as it was before. So, like, my turntable is called U-Turn Audio, and
Okay.
they're made in Cambridge, Mass. They're only a couple $100, but they're very high end. Um, so it's kind of like I get it. Like, I just want to go back to the technology being more convenient, not better.
Yeah.
So it's cheaper, it's faster, and like now they want like the phone, like the cell phones want you to like have your credit card, so you can just go boop
Yeah.
phone and you could buy something. It's like, well, that's not necessarily a good thing, and but
especially if you're not disciplined in your spending.
but I mean, I think the deal is we had different. So we didn't have $1,000 iPhones back in the 80s, right? So we weren't, I think it's as far as this goes, it's where we find our dollar to be important. So
Okay.
if like say you and I want to get the experience of like the Scorpions Blackout or Michael Schenker or, his first album. Well, we'd have to invest in a system to do that, which wasn't a problem in the 80s. But now with all this technology, with a laptop and all this, and we can do all this, it's more convenient, but it's not giving you the experience.
Part of what's also missing is you could listen to stuff by yourself, but there was also the communal aspect of, hey man, I got this new album, come on over to my place and let's listen to it. That I think is that's kind of missing, right? Mark has another question here. What do you think of people uploading vinyl rips onto YouTube? Does it make a difference? That's interesting because actually a lot of stuff on YouTube with a lot of stuff with bands that are not particularly well known, that's where you find it, is on YouTube, right?
Yeah, so there's a few things to speak about. This is a great question, by the way, Mark. Thank you. So first of all, as far as the sonic experience, you're not getting it. It would be like it would be interesting if you were interested in buying the record. You could get a vibe of what the album's about. And Greg and I were talking yesterday that I'm in a fight with a certain distribution that put all of my albums on YouTube without my permission, and they're collecting the revenue from the ads. Although, as Greg and I joked, hardly anyone's listened to them. So, but yeah, I mean, we're talking about intellectual property. We're talking about $20,000, $30,000 investment that went into making the albums. And now it's like, well, it's all for free because that's a mentality now. But the flip side is you're not getting the experience. So if I hear something on YouTube, for example, like, oh, check out the new whatever record, like say the Scorpions put out a new record of Michael Schenker, you might want to hear basically generally what's going on. But then I would purchase it because I mean, that's the experience to me. It's not like I'm trying to support anyone. It's just, I guess that was our thing back then. It was our pleasure to fork over the money, and we couldn't wait to get the vinyl and show off to our friends. Like when Motley Crue's album Shout at the Devil came out, one kid in our school had it and we all wanted to go over his house and hear it,
This is a total side note, but I remember when I was in high school, when somebody did get a new tape or a new album, they often would bring it to school and they'd show it off. They'd be like, look at this, and everyone would be like, oh, that's so cool. Let me take a look at it, and then after a while they'd be like, okay, pause off. I don't want it to get all grimy and stuff. Well, I mean, you said your school, you were one of the few metalheads. So obviously that wasn't happening, right?
Oh, Mark asked a follow-up question. I didn't answer your question. I apologize. No. So what happens is if you rip from a CD or vinyl, it gets compressed down to an MP3. So no matter what the quality was, it goes down to an MP3, which is far inferior. I guess it would be like if we took the Mona Lisa and did a photocopy of it and a photocopy of it and a photocopy of it and a photocopy of it. It still looks like a Mona Lisa.
It's like the people who go to the Louvre, right? And then they have their iPhones out. I've seen this. They you have to shuffle up to get to the Mona Lisa because it's tiny. And then they're snapping these pictures and,
You're going to frame them.
Yeah.
But it's not the experience of seeing, like with painting, there's texture, there's all this stuff. That people, a side note, I was doing a session about 8 years ago and there was a painting in the studio that I really loved. And I asked the person, I said, is this would you sell that to me? I'd like to buy that. Yeah. It was just a cool painting. And he's like, no, I like it. I'm not going to sell it. So the drummer went up and took a picture of it. He goes, yeah, there, now just go to the Kinko's and have it framed. But that kind of,
it's not quite the same, is it?
Well, it's not the same, but also kind of offended me. Not only are musicians, but artists are the whole, I'll take a screenshot of this and then I'll send it to Kinko's and get something. And then I have that work, but it's not the same experience of seeing the texture and the actual color. Right. So anyways, Mark, that was a really good question because vinyl CD, you can't really tell once it goes down to MP3, which is a very inferior
format. Yeah.
Well, so MP3, the point of MP3 is that you can fit thousands of them on your phone. and or your computer. And the reason, and so what they have to do is they have to make them small files.
Yeah, yeah.
So as you turn it up, you get a headache, your ears ring. So
That's interesting. So, when MP3 players started, becoming a big thing, it really was a matter of convenience, and people were bragging, oh, I've got like 500 songs on this,
right.
and now it'd be like 500 songs, that's nothing. um but yeah, we've gotten kind of trapped into that, right?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's a great conversation because um we were promised a lot of things in the late 90s. Musicians were promised you'll reach audiences around the world. More people will hear your music. You'll sell more.
Yeah,
Da, da, da. And what happened as a result is we have very low quality. We have singles, and people, uh, you might remember you buy Love at First Sting by the Scorpions. You put the needle on and you listen to it the way they intended you to listen to it, with the songs in the order they were put in. And now it's just kind of like this single, this playlist.
yeah, yeah.
We've lost the art of the album, which was essentially a story. If you go to like Queensryche Operation Mindcrime, well, you can't really get the experience unless you listen to the movie,
Yeah, if
right?
you were to listen to that on shuffle, it doesn't make much sense, right? Any concept album. But we should jump into talking about the development of metal. So I wanted to focus on some early, let's call them early mid 70s bands, the ones that were viewed as really making a big contribution. Then we'll start veering off into others. And there are some topics and issues that we want to bring up. For example, we're not going to talk about it right this second, but like, why did English become the lingua franca for metal when there was like a strong let's sing in German scene in other genres? So Scorpions are absolutely central, right? And you can look at them as being not just a band in their own right, but also spinning off a few other things. When we talk about Michael Schechner, he gets his start in the Scorpions, jumps ship for UFO, comes back to play on Love Drive a bit, and then launches his own band, which is Scott and I were talking about this, and Scott was saying that's more, you could call it more European metal than German metal, but it's
As
you
far as
know
the genre.
yeah, yeah. And then you've got Uli von Roth, very important early guitarist after Michael Schechner with the Scorpions, who did some solid work and then goes off and founds his own band, which is still around today. But so the Scorpions, the backstory, I think a lot of people know the Scorpions from their 1980s stuff, but they really take off in the 70s, and that sets the stage for that. Officially, you can say they were founded in 65, but they weren't really founded in 65. That's Rudolph
Right.
Schechner doing his thing. And
Right.
then by 1970, his younger brother, Michael, joins. And a word of advice too, Michael does a lot of interviews where he tells a lot of stories about the original founding and how Rudolph didn't have any talent. That's clearly false.
Oh yeah.
Um, but in any case, Klaus Meine and Rudolph joined at that time, and they managed to bring out one album, Lonesome Crow, which if any of you have ever listened to, it's kind of jazzy. There's some metal stuff in there. Nobody was calling it metal at the time. And then Michael leaves and the band effectively breaks up. And what we know as the Scorpions is actually Scorpions Mark II. What happened
Right.
was Rudolph Schechner got in with this other band called Dawn Road, and he was jamming with them and playing with them, and he joins that band and brings Klaus Meine in there, and then effectively takes over the band. They changed the name to the Scorpions because the Scorpions was already a successful name and nobody had heard of Dawn Road.
Right.
So it's sort of like with Deep Purple. You got Deep Purple Mark I and Mark II. This is Scorpions Mark II. And then they release Fly to the Rainbow, which if you've ever listened to, there are some metal songs on there. There's also some like psychedelic trippy stuff.
Well, that was the era where the world was exploding. I say the world.
Yeah.
Classical composers in Europe and America, like Philip Glass or Stockhausen, Everything blew up in the 60s, maybe because it was socially, but you hear it in rock albums. Like I think I told you the weird Pink Floyd thing I saw in like
Yeah.
66, where the guy, the British guy, the BBC guy was like, this isn't my cup of tea, but the kids seem to like them. And it was completely psychedelic and experimental.
Yeah.
But I think that you would hear that with all the German bands as well. It's kind of like, what if we did this? What if we made this sound possibilities?
Yeah. And so this is kind of a side note here. These early German heavy metal bands, looking back at them, they did not view themselves as heavy metal bands until later. So you hear this from, Rudolph Schenker, for example, and Klaus Meine. You hear this clearly in Udo talking about it. He was asked in an interview recently, were you part of a heavy metal scene? And he was like, there wasn't a heavy metal scene. We became the heavy metal scene. What we were is part of hard and heavy rock. And that's how they conceptualized themselves, which allowed for a greater, if you're doing heavy metal, there's a sense in which, well, you got to do this stuff, but don't do this stuff over here. Right. And so it allowed, I think, for a greater artistic freedom than maybe if they, started in the 1980s and self-identified as heavy metal.
And also remember, like, the progression of music history. Certain things didn't exist when these bands came out, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you and I joke all the time, like, I have students that, like, to all of us here, heavy metal is one thing, Maiden, Dio, but now it's like, well, is it,
is it this genre or that genre, right?
If there's like probably 100 subgenres, is it like math rock? Is it math metal? Is it Norwegian death metal? Is it Norwegian black metal? And like, I'm just thinking, like, what happened to just metal? But
yeah, I mean, and I think that only worked until metal became very successful, and then by the mid 80s, people really are making distinctions. I mean, think about the animus that thrash. So we're talking about, mid to early 80s thrash people had against what they would call pop metal or metal light, or
right,
that big designation of hair metal. Think about how we're going to talk about this in a bit, the notion of speed metal. What exactly is that, right? That was not a stable genre, but Accept was viewed as being like absolutely central to it, as was Motorhead and Raven, and you could say, well, I play speed metal today, but nobody would actually know what you mean.
That's true.
Anvil would be another speed metal band that got identified with that Canadian band.
Well, Anthrax was, because double kick drums. It was like, I remember that when Anthrax came out, like, people said it was speed metal.
That's interesting, because this might be a regional thing. I get introduced to them as, hey, here's another thrash band,
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe these genre things are kind of unstable until they become kind of ossified later on by like the mid 90s, and people are like, I do this kind of metal, I do not do this kind of metal.
And I hear it all the time. It's like, I'll ask a student first off, like, what do you identify as a player right now?
Yeah.
Or what are your goals? And they'll always have something. It's like a paragraph. Instead of just metal, it's blah, 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 metal.
Yeah.
But it's like, there's like 10 words that become, or adjectives that become, that come before the word metal. And I'm like, all right, I'm not going
to. Those are qualifiers. I mean, if we're thinking in terms of like grammar and philosophy, what those do effectively, ideally, I should say, because there's always a lot of messiness to this, is they define for us the range of what we're looking at,
right.
And in many areas of life, that can be extremely useful. I mean, you go to the hardware store, you don't want there to be any loosey-goosiness about the kind of equipment that you're picking out. But I think in artistic areas, it can often become an impediment for both producers, but also for consumers,
Yeah, I mean, well, if you think about, let's go back to the 80s. If you went to a record store, there'd be rock, jazz, blues, classical. And
there might be a metal section,
Maybe.
If it's a big enough store.
Right. A lot of it, like you'd find the Scorpions and Iron Maiden under rock
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
the earlier
exactly.
days.
Yeah.
But you know, record stores don't so much exist now. But you know, I'm always curious, what would Accept go under? What would the Scorpions go under?
Well, it's interesting because if you look at Apple Music, right, which does have these categories preserved in it, they do have a metal category, but a lot of the bands that we consider to be metal are actually under rock rather than metal. It
Classic rock.
seems, yeah, it seems like metal is the way that Apple Music understands it is more for the later genres. You
Right.
know, Mark. Mark says something here, so this would be a great one for you to field, Scott. Genres are for the audience, not the artists. What do you think?
No, absolutely, because um, I remember John Harrington is a guitar player from New York, and he was doing this thing with Mark Egan from Pat Metheny Group and all this, and it was, you know, people would call it fusion,
Okay.
but it was eclectic. And I'll never forget, they asked him, they said, well, what are you? What is this music we're hearing? He goes, I never thought about it. Why do you want to put a label to it? So they're not thinking. So I agree. It's kind of like you make the music you want to make, and then the record companies say, well, we need to know where to file this. Right. So
or they put pressure on you sometimes on the record. Well, this thing is really getting trendy. So can you
right.
make your sound more like this, you know?
So genre is for the audience, as far as like, well, you know, like we get the thing like, what's the most classic cliche is, I like all music except country, you know, or I like this, but like, so it becomes kind of a, I think the audience identifies. I've always noticed people identifying with, I don't like country because I'm not that kind of person, or I don't like metal because I don't like that. I'm not that kind of person. But for the bands themselves, I don't think, that's a good point. I mean, when I make music personally, I don't care what you call it. I don't know what to call it. You know, it's just, I hope you like it, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but that's a really good point, because I think you and I have talked in the past, you know, if you identify as a metal person, well, the one other person in my school, we identified together, and we were
Yeah.
kind of like buds, and we connected through the metal label.
Yeah. That was a really, really important aspect of say 1970s, 1980s, maybe going into the 1990s. The metal scene was that camaraderie that would come about of being into the same kind of bands, look, maybe lifestyle, you know. I mean, some of that part wasn't particularly good. I mean, you know, there was
Right.
a good bit of like pretending to be much more aggressive or stupid than you were in order to fit in, on my part at least.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
The jean jacket with, we always talk about
with
the
the patches and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
patches make it on your jean jacket.
Yeah, and you know, what are you actually like scribbling on your folders, you know, or or in my case, my jeans. Let's come back to the time about the Scorpions, you know,
Yes.
and this scene. So, you know, I mentioned two early albums, you know, Lonesome Crow and Fly to the Rainbow. By the time that we get to In Trance, and that's 1975, and then Virgin Killer, Taken by Force, these are the Uli von Roth albums.
Yep.
It's definitely metal. It may not be identified as such by the Scorpions or by some of the listeners. They might be more willing to say, "Oh, it's just heavy rock, man," you know. But it's clearly within the metal spectrum, and it's being played on the same kind of radio stations that, you know, say Deep Purple or Black Sabbath or the other bands like that, or Judas Priest are going to be played on. And you know, you look at this, and the notion of like heavy metal, the this is going to be a little bit of a rant on my part. Rob Halford, I love the guy, but he's got this this narrative that's clearly false about the development of heavy metal, where first it was Black Sabbath and maybe Deep Purple was doing something as well, and then it was this long wasteland until Judas Priest came around in 1975. Scorpions were doing metal in 75. You
Well,
know,
gotcha.
other bands were too. We've talked about this before, but you know, this is clearly a sign of that. And then, you know, after that, they keep churning out more and more stuff, and they are really the powerhouse, you could say, of German heavy metal. And then there's a couple other bands. I mean, we mentioned Accept. We really have to credit them as being like the second most definitive German early metal band. They're formed officially in '76, but there's a kind of backstory to that. There was another band that Udo Dirkschneider was in called Band X that developed into Accept in some ways. Wolf Hoffman managed to get some of the legal rights to things, in part because his, at that time, girlfriend, then later wife, was doing a good bit of the songwriting and also managing the band. And the real core of the band early on was Wolf Hoffman, Udo Dirkschneider, Peter Baltus on bass. People like Herman Frank would come in later, but they went through some transitions with drummers and with guitarists. And their first album is '79, so it's right on that cusp. When we're about to see the new wave of British heavy metal. Accept comes on the scene, and they're like identified as speed metal. I'm a Rebel is 1980, Breaker is 81, Restless and Wild 82, Balls to the Walls 83. So they're just churning out records.
Yeah, wow.
And they're getting heavier and heavier. They also, I will mention on Breaker, there's a song called Son of a Bitch, which is unplayable on radio stations because it's basically just a bunch of swears put together to try to stick it to the record company, because then they're already ticked off at that. But there's a couple other bands that we should mention that people might not have heard of. I talked about Trance a little bit earlier. They formed in the mid '70s, and they didn't actually secure an album contract until the '80s. They have Breakout and Power Infusion in '82 and '83, and then Victory in '85. If you haven't heard them, they're worth listening to. It's solid heavy metal. They were poised to really break out, and they ended up getting screwed by their manager. Eventually they worked things out, but they were caught in a lawsuit for a long time. I'll mention another thing too. Those three bands, all three of them, there was a really important producer, Dieter Dierks, who had his own studio, who produced, the Scorpions and Accept, and Trance was supposed to work with Dierks, but he was too busy with these other bands. Had that happened, we might be talking about them in the same way that we do Scorpions and Accept. There was another band as well that's worth, actually two bands that are worth mentioning in this period too. So one was called Kakumen. And if you haven't heard of them, that's because they changed their name to Bonfire, and they're still around today. And the reason that they changed their name is because nobody had any idea what the hell they were supposed to mean. It's sort of like with in American metal, Cirith Ungol, it's a cool name, but nobody knew how to pronounce it or what it was supposed to be. And they felt that held them back. So they made a deliberate choice to change their name. They did record three things under the name of Kakumen: Riding Away, which was a single, and then a self-titled album, Kakumen, and then Bad Widow, or in the early '80s. So they're part of the metal scene as well. And then I think maybe some of us here know Running Wild. And if we do, it could be because of their early stuff, or it could be because they are not the only originators, but probably the most important originators of pirate metal, a genre that consists in, singing about the sea and piracy and stuff like that.
And people in the audience, by the way, dress up as pirates. I mean, it's
I mean, it's its own thing, but if you look at their early stuff, so they're a mid '80s or mid 1970s band at first. They form in '76. They don't secure a record contract until the mid '80s. So they could have broken out earlier, but the stars didn't align. Gates to Purgatory, Branded and Exiled, those are not pirate metal. Those are just sort of straight ahead power metal, speed metal, whatever we want to call it, from the mid '80s. And then under Jolly Roger, well, you know what, that's a pretty easy one to, identify as the turning point. So these are some of the big things that are happening. There's some other bands as well that are important: Gravestone, Gravedigger, Living Death, Steeler, Storm Witch. We should also talk about Warlock. They get formed in 82 out of some other bands that Doro Pesch had. And their stories kind of, in some ways, kind of tragic. Actually, I marked this thing from an interview. So Doro, when she was asked about how it was when she was starting out, she said, in the 80s, it was a little tricky because I couldn't speak English and neither could the band. I'd have an idea and I'd write lyrics using a dictionary. Sometimes it was very funny. Once we had a song called I'm the Red Light Star. We went and played in England and some journalist says, yeah, you have some interesting lyrics. What is I'm the Red Light Star about? And I said, it was about going on stage and feeling the lights on you. And then he said, well, that's the red light here is where the hookers go. And so, there was that going on. And then later in that interview, she talks about how she became Doro and the band Doro. The European manager had been screwing them over, like taking the t-shirt sales, had written all sorts of things into the contract that were very binding. And it was only when they went on tour in America in the 1980s, mid-80s, that the American manager looked at it and was like, this is a terrible contract. You got to get out of this somehow. The only way out of that contract, she said, and this is in a later part of that interview, she said, here we go. When I first started out, I never thought things could go wrong. I used to think everyone was our friend. I learned the hard way there's more to the music business than those who love it, and we had to learn how to survive without either our name or our money. We sold millions of t-shirts at the time, which made us the third biggest selling merchandise band after Metallica and Iron Maiden. The manager took all the earnings and made sure the band didn't get anything. And then she said, when we broke off, the European manager quit and took away Warlock's income and recording budgets. So, he even took their name. They couldn't perform anymore under their name. And so she had to become Doro and start touring under that name. It was still the same band, but that was the only way that they could make a living.
Right.
By going off and doing that. But she and Warlock are an important part of that scene as well. So you can see there's a lot of bands in the late 70s, early 80s starting to make their mark. A lot of them, I would say, the ones that are known over here at that time would be Accept, Warlock, and the Scorpions. But there's a lot of stuff happening within the German scene. And those Germans are, some of them, able to get over here to the States. They're definitely touring around Europe and definitely going to Britain as well. So we have the formation of something like a solid, metal network, you could say.
Yeah. But I feel like Doro is more popular in the States than Warlock. I feel
that's probably a function of the renaming, right? She was touring in the States more under Doro and certainly for a lot longer.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you ask somebody about Doro, they know. Warlock. Yes, the diehards know Warlock.
Yeah.
But I saw Doro a few years ago with my friend, and she was fantastic. I mean, it was great show, worth every penny. She's great. She just she gave like 150%. And I told Greg this yesterday, which was kind of interesting. She was really sick that night, but sang great, performed great. But she waited for about 2.5 hours and didn't leave until everybody got their picture with her, or she signed everything and said hello to anybody that wanted to say hi to her, which I thought was pretty impressive. She comes over here to the States and plays these clubs and is fine. What I thought of is like the whole meet and greet thing at $250 to get a picture. Well, she didn't charge anything. She came out and waited and signed and took pictures. And I thought that was pretty,
it conveys a certain ethos, a
yes.
connection to the fans, a seriousness about the music and the experience, you could say, right?
Yeah. And
it's not being commercialized. Like when Kiss does stuff,
right.
Yeah, well,
you
get what you pay for.
Often. But I guess, Greg and I were discussing, purchasing. I purchased a Michael Schenker live album, and I showed Greg yesterday. I said, here's the thing. It was only it wasn't that much money, but it was a double CD and a DVD. And like, I feel like if you're a metal fan, the metal bands give you a lot for your money, right?
Right. Yeah.
And country artists as well, but maybe that's why metal bands are selling. Well, you had mentioned like, well, you can't just go to Apple Music and see the DVD. Like, you'd have to buy that package to get the DVD of it, although you can listen to it on
Right.
Apple Music. So I think this is a big thing. And yeah, with the metal bands, it's like they very much appreciate the fans. But like, you know, that when I saw Doro do that, I said to my friend, I said, I can't believe this.
You know, this is there's something else in the interviews that I was like pouring through that I
Yeah,
think is connected to this, and it's in an interview with Rudolph Schenker, who's somebody who I really admire, because I kind of think that no Rudolph Schenker, no Scorpions. It doesn't matter how great, Michael Schechner or Uli von Roth or Matthias Jobs are as guitarists, or, they've had some great bassists as well.
sure.
I think that, Rudolph Schenker, he's so absolutely central to the music writing process. And he's also, so Michael Schechner is always like, oh, Rudolph sucks, and that's why he hangs back. And I think it's actually more of a humility thing. He's fine playing rhythm guitar. He does play solo on a few songs, but he's sort of like the Steve Harris, with Iron Maiden.
Right.
Although Steve Harris is an incredibly talented bassist, Steve Harris is also the guy who makes sure that everything goes the way it's supposed to go and the music is done the right way. And he's the band leader. And I think that's Rudolph Schenker. So he said in this interview, he's saying, the situation is, and he's talking about their success, if you trust your feelings and you really have a philosophy, then you can do it. Because the problem is mostly from the American English bands, they're mostly, okay, let's come together, let's play music, let's see what's happening. So in America and England, there are managements, big managements, telling you mostly not the truth. They're telling you some, let's say, believe what you like to believe. And then he says, when we started the Scorpions in Germany, I did the management. So nobody could tell me, what to do. Nobody could tell me what's true and what's not. I decide for myself what the truth is. And then he said, from this moment on, I noticed what I had to do to make the career of the band. First of all, the band Scorpions is based on the philosophy of friendship. I was always looking for good musicians, no question about this, but for musicians who I could build a friendship with, which chemistry-wise links into my personality. And he goes on in the interview to, bring this up a couple more times, that friendship has to be a central part of it. Now he's talking there about like the intra-band stuff, the different players. And that's really important. I'll bring up an example of something very different than that, having to do with Accept in a moment. That Andy and I observed when we saw them. I think it was in 2014 or so on the Blind Rage tour. But I think it could also extend to the fans. It's very easy to say stuff like, oh, you look down at the monitor, oh, Milwaukee, we love to be here. So wonderful, right? And you don't have any clue where the hell you are, how's everybody doing tonight? All that sort of patter. It's a whole different thing to connect with fans on a personal level, even if it's only just for, a minute each fan. Right. It's something quite different. Going back to the intra-band thing, when we saw Accept, it was a great show, except for something shameful that was happening on stage, which was that they had Herman Frank as the second guitarist, along with Wolf Hoffman, and Wolf Hoffman was basically like just bullying him on stage. I mean, there was something clearly going on. And then Frank and the drummer at the time quit soon afterwards. And it was, you could tell like there was no, for Hoffman, he was the key person, and there really wasn't room for anybody else on the stage, and subsequently Hoffman and Baltus couldn't even stay together, and so it's interesting too. I'll mention another thing about Hoffman. So Udo Dirkschneider said that without realizing it, they signed their ways into contracts where Hoffman got the name Accept, and he got a lot of the other stuff that goes along with it. In part because Hoffman's wife by then was their manager. And so, when you do stuff like that, it's kind of dirty pool, and it's going to break up. It's going to turn everything into a professional relationship rather than a friendly relationship,
And just from this is a great philosophy, because I have a saying, or anybody here that's a musician that performs, we have a thing, and it's like, I have my band, I'm going to hire a bass player and all this, but the big question that we kind of joke about is, can we spend 6 months on a tour bus with this person
without killing each other?
Right. So, and I learned at a young age that it's not always the best player that gets the gig, because you might have somebody that's absolutely fantastic, but not a good person.
Yeah.
And that will lead to problems down the road. So you get a very good player that's very musical or whatever. But I think I love the quote you got from Rudolph, that he had the right mindset from the beginning, because like, if this is going to be successful, we need to get along. And usually, I haven't heard that in the context of a band as much, because we always hear bands fighting. But
yeah,
say you have Doro, like if she hires her band, part of the thing she's going to say is, can I deal with this guitar player on a nightly basis or on the tour bus? And that's a very important thing. And that's a great quote you found. I wasn't aware of that he said that.
Yeah, he's a surprisingly thoughtful guy in a lot of these. Well, I shouldn't say surprising. Why should we be surprised that somebody who could actually put together a mega band and keep it together over all these years?
Well, because when we were kids, we had like our
we see his picture and he's just like playing the guitar. Yeah.
So of course he's a rock star. But that's a great thing. It's a great philosophy for a band. And we talk about, in past episodes with us, on this, we would talk about, okay, when's the band not a band anymore? We've got 2 versions of this band, two versions of that band. And, like we talked about Queensryche, like which is the real Queensryche,
right?
Jack Tate one, or
Rat or Saxon, what went into that? Yeah. Oftentimes having to go to the courts to decide these things.
Which is a shame, but
I'll mention too, there is one band who managed to do that quite well, and even with one of the members, and sort of split off bands being a self-proclaimed misanthrope, and that's Algie Ward. That's Tank, right? There's 2 Tanks out there right now. One of them is just Algie Ward, who can't tour anymore, and so he's got his own home studio and he plays all the instruments, and every once in a while he drops a record, And then there's the other Tank, which has Evans and Tucker as the 2 guitarists, and then they sometimes swap out singers. They had Doogie White for a while. I'm not quite sure who they have
really
at present. Yeah. And they do the old Tank songs, but they also produce new stuff. And both of them are producing new things,
Gotcha.
And they're both good, And apparently, as Algie Ward is as warm towards them as he can be towards anybody, which is not all that much. I mean, if you look at the relationship in Accept between, so when they actually break up and Udo goes his own way, and then it's essentially Hoffman and Baltus, and Herman Frank, who's not going to stay there that long himself anyway. It's not quite so, it's not super acrimonious like it is with Saxon, but there's no love lost between Dirk Schneider and Hoffman, that's for sure.
What a shame. Well, we call it, Dio always called it LGD, lead guitarist, LGS, lead guitarist syndrome.
Yeah.
And then lead singer.
He must have had Michael Schechner in mind when he was. I wanted to, since you brought up Dio, one of the other things that I found out that was really quite interesting, when you there are some people, when you listen to interviews with them, you're like, wow, that person's really thoughtful, and they're relating to the interviewer. They're being very honest about the rock and roll industry and scene. What they have to say is really quite interesting. Udo Dirkschneider is one of those people. Guess who Udo Dirkschneider hung out with and took advice from? Ronnie James Dio.
That warms my heart. That is the best story. You told me that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's not surprising, but in a way, it's also kind of a cool thing to find out.
I wonder how they met. Do you know that?
I think it was touring.
But what like, I don't, not to like piggy off this, but remember, we're Stars Hearing Aid.
Yeah,
remember,
but that would have been like mid-80s, right? I think.
Right. So Dio was the producer, and he had like, Don Dokken and all these people, and he was directing all of them. And Dokken and all these singers would say, he'd suggest that they do something else. You have to make it more like this.
Yeah.
And each and every one of them said, I got that from you, Ronnie. Like, it was just, I missed that at the time. But like, if you look at it on YouTube, there must have been mad attitude in the mid-80s with Yngwie there and all these people. But everybody did, kind of praise Dio to his face, going,
with Dio, I imagine that given what you can tell from the interviews, obviously I've never met the guy in my life, right? So I haven't interacted with him. He's been dead for 10 years.
Yeah.
But you would imagine that, so he would say something, and then maybe the singer or guitarist or whoever, the drummer could be, pushes back because of ego. And there's one of three things you can do at that point. You can be like, well, fuck it, I'm out of here. I'm not going to talk with this person, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go sulk, or, I'll remove them from the tour or something like that. Another would be to like get belligerent and argue with them about it, and try to turn it into a thing. And I imagine that, I suppose another thing would be to give in to them, which I don't imagine Dio did either. And another would be to be persuasive, to be like, listen, I can see things from your side, but here's what we need in this, and the bigger project is this. And I just listening to him, I imagine that Dio was probably good at that kind of persuasion, and if you think about like who Dio came up under first, Richie Blackmore would have been one of those like, fine, you're off of the tour,
right.
Whereas I think Dio was much more of a a good rhetorician and pragmatic about these sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, like, in his interviews, he was always very matter of fact.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know if anybody here has ever seen the one where this guy gets on the tour bus to interview him.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And he hands him the albums in order. And he'll go, oh, this is a great record. I remember this one, the Sabbath or whatever. This is garbage. Yeah. This is garbage. Don't put your money on that. And like, but he never raised his voice. He was always like very even tempered.
Things are in proportion for him.
Yeah. So he's like, this is terrible.
And he saves the theatrics for the stage, you could say, right?
Nobody better. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ultimate, but like, that's interesting. So, there was a crossover with the German bands. I mean, if Udo and him were hanging, that's I'd love to hear him talk about Dio.
Another crossover. You mentioned Don Dokken earlier on. Dokken came to Germany, and he was involved with the production of the Blackout album. Klaus Meine had I forget exactly what was wrong with his vocal cords, but he had to have an operation. And there were some worries about whether he was ever really going to be able to sing again. And so Dokken did the backing lyrics, and he also did, you remind me about this term, the
scratch vocals.
Right. So he did that. And then Klaus Meine, recovered, and that was then Dokken, went back to the States. But for a little while, it looked like, maybe he'd be involved with the Scorpions in a significant way.
I have to look into, like, I'll look into that. I wonder how he got involved. It's kind of like LA to Germany kind of thing. It's like,
yeah.
But I bet you those scratch vocals exist somewhere. I bet you we can find them.
you know, one way in which these bands would get to know each other was, and this is something I wanted to talk about, through influence in touring, right?
Right.
So a lot of these German bands are influenced by, and they'll tell you straight out, you know, like we listened to Black Sabbath, we listened to Deep Purple, like the Scorpions, when they first started out, they actually played covers of those bands. And so there's that aspect, but then there's the touring, right? It wasn't just the Beatles who toured in Germany. Everybody else did too, because the Germans did, in fact, well, the Europeans in general liked heavy metal. And then the German bands, a small tour would be just in like Germany, but then the bigger tours would take you to France, Belgium, Netherlands, maybe down into Italy, depending on what's going on, maybe through East Germany over to Berlin,
Right.
towards the you know, mid to late 80s. You could also like go behind the Iron Curtain and start
Right.
playing there. Actually, one of the things I wanted to bring up about Accept is they got misidentified in two different ways, and kind of interesting, and in one case kind of funny stuff. So, you know, they wore a lot of military uniforms, like old cast off stuff that they'd buy like at whatever the German equivalent of Goodwill is,
Right.
or an army surplus store.
Right.
And when that worked just fine for Germany, worked fine for the United States, England. When they got to France, they've got a, you know, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, shaven head guy as their lead singer, and they're decked out in old German regalia. They got labeled as a Nazi band, and it actually cost them some tour dates, until
Really?
until they got things straightened out. And you know, they you know, like on some of their songs, they would sometimes get booed because the French viewed them as being Nazi, fascistic, however you want to
Oh
think
my
about it.
God.
The other thing that was kind of funny was, I mentioned that Wolf Hoffman's wife was involved in some of the songwriting. And as Wolf Hoffman has said in interviews, and also Dirk Schneider has backed this up, some of the songs were written essentially from a woman's perspective about guys.
Oh,
And you know, what are we talking about there? Well, you know, female gaze as opposed to the male gaze, or ways of describing things. So Accept got labeled for a while as being a gay metal band. And that was,
I didn't know
yeah.
that.
And you know, they obviously in the mid 80s they were trying to avoid that sort of image. I mean, nowadays it's not an issue at all, but
Sure.
it was kind of an interesting point there. Like, you know, London Leather Boys, right, off of the Balls to the Wall album would be one of the biggest ones that people would center in. Mark Smith writes the intro to Fast as a Shark, where they say hi dee, hi ho, hi da, was a problem because it was a folk song popular with the Nazis or something like that. Yeah, and they don't.
Oh, yeah.
They also don't do it in Poland. That's another place where that does not go over well. So they learned from experience not to do that.
Well, it's funny because going back to the Stay in a Life, the live album from '85, the cover is Udo on stage with his military gear on.
Yeah.
That was Japan.
Okay.
But interesting.
I mean, look at the Russian Roulette album cover, right? They're all in military uniforms.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
You know, that actually leads us into some other things as well that we are going to talk about. Like, you know, the one thing we do want to hit on is why English? Why is German metal pretty much all in English? But we could talk about other things that don't. Before we do that, there's a few other things that represent, you could say, a different cultural set of assumptions. And what I have in mind here is emblemized in the Scorpions album covers, like Love Drive, for example, right?
Yep.
The back cover of it had a woman who was partially naked on it, and that ran into problems in the United States and in Britain, right? And the Scorpions were like, well, what's the problem with this? You know, different sets of cultural assumptions about sexuality, and you know, so we can say that there's a lot of potential interference areas
Right.
that German metal bands had to deal with. But let's talk about the English thing, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Were they just being, like straight out mercenary and saying, listen, we're going to sell way more albums if we do our songwriting in English? And like Doro, like she said, didn't really know what she was singing at the time.
Right.
Klaus Meine says, I mean, you listen to him like in interviews in the 80s, even now he's got a super thick accent. We used to have these commercials. I don't know if they had them where you grew up, but there was one for like QFM Milwaukee. And it was Klaus Meine, and he'd be like, hello, Milwaukee, I listen to QFM, and you'd be like, this guy doesn't know English at all.
And I remember in the 80s reading interviews, and I have it somewhere. I kept it because I felt like the person interviewing him was super rude. So it was like, every time he stopped and didn't know the word, he would say, the round things you throw things in, like that you don't want anymore.
Yeah.
He would print that. He goes, a trash can. And he was like, yeah, that's what it is. But he, if you want to be a jerk as a journalist, you print everything.
Right.
You can't get in trouble for it. But it's, but like every time Klaus, and he goes, and, he'd make the side note, Klaus is very frustrated. Or, so he's doing this interview. And the guy's angle was, this guy can't speak English. And I'll never forget that because, he spoke English fine, but, he didn't know the words to describe. He was talking about, kind of like B stock songs of the Scorpions.
Yeah.
And, we throw them in the trash, but he would say, what's that thing that he was trying to garbage can. And then, but, I remember seeing that going, this is, even at my age.
It's one thing to memorize a set of lyrics and to belt it out. I mean, it's repetition, right? You're singing the song over and over and over again. It's a whole different thing to hold a conversation with somebody, especially when you're like on a tour and you're probably all strung out from driving all over the place. And so there were a few interesting things that again, when I went to interviews, bands were saying. Klaus Meine in an interview said, is there anything German in our music? I don't know. That's a good question. Obviously, we're from Germany, but we grew up with English and American music, which was a strong inspiration for us. Early on in the 70s, we went to England and France, to Japan and America. We toured and we became an international band. So if Michael Schenker Group is an international band because he's a German artist himself, but he has all sorts of other people who are working with him who are not German, sort of like Rainbow. Rainbow is not a British band because even though Richie Blackmore is, he's got all these other people. I think you could say that about the Scorpions. And then he says, I think our music was never German. It's always had this Anglo-American influence. We never tried to be a German band. We are Germans, but not in our music. When we grew up, there was Schlager music, this pop music kind of thing. And there was a lot of German, music in German. Udo said something really interesting in a recent interview. And he was asked, well, why did Accept do their stuff in English? And he said, rock and roll has to be in English. And obviously that's not the case 100%, but he went on to explain, he said, listen, rock and roll developed in English. That is the language for it. And then the interviewer said, well, that gets you bigger distribution. He's like, yeah, that's true too, but this is the real reason. So it was as if, you would express yourself, and all these bands that we've brought up, we mentioned about, I think, 10 or 15 bands, they're all in English, and they all made the choice to do their stuff in English. I don't think it was just a matter of let's get better distribution. I think there was kind of a feeling that, like what Udo is expressing, that this is the way it's done,
And, of course, we had talked yesterday, you can't take, it's hard to take a song in English and put it in another language, because a one syllable word with us might be 3 syllables in another language, and then the rhythm's off. But we talked about, what do you call, sayings? We have Or like you got another thing coming. You brought up. So
Oh, right. Yeah. Where they take
what's
not a cliche, but a common saying,
a common saying that
and
like
they
that's
yeah, they transform it into sometimes they play around with it a little bit in the wording. Chris says metal transcends national categorization, perhaps. Consider this Finnish offspring of German and English influences, and that is coronary. Um, Says that they sound like an offspring of Accept and Judas Priest. Yeah,
kind of band.
yeah. I mean, and there's another Finnish band that in the 1980s, it's just called Oz. And so I think that may have been a little problematic because it's close enough to Ozzy that people could be like, oh, I don't need to
Right.
buy this. I've already heard it. Sort of like Riot and Quiet Riot. Riot was a
Yeah.
New York band, and then, Quiet Riot getting good essentially did them in. Oz was doing what sounds like new wave of British heavy metal in the early 80s in Finland, and so there's a lot of interesting things like that. And Oz was singing in English as well. I mean, almost everybody sings in English, with the exception of a few French bands. And then they don't get big, because they're not getting the distribution that they might have otherwise gotten. I'm blanking on the name of one that's quite good. Sortilege. Most of their songs are in French, and that I think really significantly restricted them. But maybe there's also something about composing in English,
I was talking about Italian singers that are here, like in Boston, and I've worked with them. And when I hear their original stuff, it's mostly in English. And I said, why don't you write in your native language? And they're just kind of like, well, that's the way it is. Like they grew up with the English speaking artists.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I mean, even like one of the biggest Italians pop stars ever, Laura Passani, is a Italian. I'm sorry, she's an Italian artist. Everything's in English, and even though she's huge in Italy, she sings in Italy in English. So I don't know if it's the impact of the words. Like look, when you're writing lyrics, there's certain sounds that have a certain impact.
Yeah. And for metal, I think that's it's harder. I would, I mean, this is sort of like being very speculative, but I would say it's probably harder to sound metal in French than it is English,
Well, German would be a good metal language, I think. Like it's pretty aggressive sounding. When you hear people talking.
I mean, if you're because there's all these dialects, right?
Right.
So like Bavarian, kind of a soft way of talking in many ways. That's where I learned my German, because that's where I was stationed in the army. Mark says some Japanese bands take a median route, verses in Japanese and then the chorus in English. I wonder if the Germans consider that option. That's a really interesting idea. I mean, Japan is its own really interesting metal thing, and in many respects, thank God for Japan, because there are so many bands that if they didn't have Japanese sales, they never would have been able to stay afloat.
No, that's like when Paul Gilbert went there. Like Paul Gilbert in America would sell out 200 seat club.
Yeah.
From Racer X and Mr. Big. But my friend actually played second guitar for him, and he went to Japan. And when he came back, he said, we were playing 20,000 seaters. I go, Paul Gilbert, 20,000 seaters? He's like, I swear to God.
Yeah.
A month. And it's, it's interesting how the, metal is so embraced in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, there's the old sort of like joke, big in Japan, right? And nobody's heard of you anywhere else. And there's all those cool Japanese, like for us, they're import albums. They would just be pressed in Japan for Japanese people, right?
Well, that's right. They always get the main pit, right?
Yeah. So I mean, there's all this stuff that we just, never had access to. By the way, mentioning Quiet Riot, one of the things that did kind of hurt them was that their first two albums were only released in Japan, not in the United States.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean
Really?
if you're an LA club band, that's probably not a great. I mean, now, admittedly, their first two albums were actually not very good too. So
was Mental Health the first one that came out here then? What was that?
Yeah.
83?
I think it's 82 or 83.
Yeah.
I want to say 83, but
Me too.
yeah. So what else? I mean, there was one other thing that I wanted to bring up that I thought was kind of cool that some people might not know about, and it's almost like trivial. And then let's open it up just to question and discussion. So there was an album called a split album, and I didn't know about this until I started digging around. And a split album is not a compilation, because a compilation, you've only got one song from each band that's on it, like Metal Killers Collection, or those who remember back in the 80s, Masters of Metal. That was another really great metal compilation. So a split album is where you have, anywhere from like 3 to 5 bands, and they all record tracks for that album. They go in as a partnership, have it pressed, have it released. They all share in the earnings. There was a split album by Death Metal that was by the bands Helloween, Hellhammer, Running Wild, and Dark Avenger, and it's the only recorded material of that band, Dark Avenger. It's kind of a cool thing. You don't see that happening a lot in the United States. This split album phenomenon. So what do you make of that, Scott? Or what does everyone else make of that phenomenon?
Well, I mean, it was news to me when you told me, because, of course, what a compilation is you take previously recorded music and just, we're going to take these two songs from this band's album and this other band's album. And then what they do to make it even is they master it for that album. So the levels are correct. So it's not like one song's loud and the next song's soft. Now, this whole thing about bringing bands in, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, which record company fronts the money? I'm curious. So if it's like you got somebody on Columbia, you got somebody on this label, so what record company ends up putting it out? Who's fronted the money? Who recoups the money? And is it more of the bands agree to do it because they'll gain an audience, piggybacking off of the other? It's kind of like, hey, Greg, you have some fans, I have some fans, let's do a collaboration. And maybe your fans will come to me and my fans will come to you. But it's pretty interesting that they've written, they're writing and producing music specifically for an album that they know that there's going to be other bands. So how do you pick the sequence of the songs? How do you, I mean, I have a lot of really good questions, because it was always like K-Tel, right? So like, sort of an album.
Going back to so I think some of the bands would be on the same level and collaborating with each other. Like in this case, Running Wild is pretty established. Hellhammer, where I think it was pretty established. Helloween was just getting going. Dark Avenger is getting kind of brought along for the ride. So it might be the sort of thing that you do where you're like, I want to help promote these other bands without having to like produce an entire EP or even LP for them. The way that we saw like in the American setting, right? Where established artists like Gene Simmons were saying, I want to produce Van Halen's album, or things like that. Maybe they did share producing expertise too. That's something that I don't know.
Since you brought it up, I'm going to look into it. So I'll I have a lot of questions because it just sounds like a logistical nightmare. I mean,
maybe it wasn't back then. Maybe that's why it could happen. I mean, nowadays you're right, especially with the really strong conceptions of IP that we have. Maybe back in the day it was easier to do. In the mid-80s.
And who got the idea, and how were the bands picked? And I'd love to hear about the whole process, because until you brought that up, I wasn't aware of that kind of split album. I don't remember owning any. you know.
So Mark says he's come across stuff like that in black metal. So maybe
Oh, interesting.
where there's associations between bands and they're connected with each other for a while, maybe tour together, stuff like that. That becomes more feasible.
It's more of a collaboration, I would say. So like, if you and I were going to put an album out together, but we're on different labels,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that, and that's really fascinating. Like, I would love to know how that works, how it comes about. I can see the benefit from it. I think it's a good idea because look, like, okay, so I love two of these bands. The other two, I don't know who it is, and it's kind of like, I think I told you, was telling Greg yesterday that when Accept's Metal Heart came out, I used to go to Tower Records in Boston. And with every purchase, you got a 45 of 2 tracks from Metal Heart. And so I don't remember what album I bought. I remember they put a 45 in there and said, this is free. And then I went home and wore out the 45 and I went and actually bought Metal Heart. So it's like, these are good promotional tools. I want to hear what else is on that album. Or
yeah, that's sort of like a little sampler, right?
It's a sampler, but like same with the collaboration album. It's kind of like, well, I've never heard of this band, but I really like them. Maybe that's the deal with the record companies, is like, we don't care. We're going to go into, because we're going to all promote these bands, and maybe the band on our label will sell more records if they agree to be on. Well, it's like you see on metal albums, if they have a guest like Adrian Vandenberg was on the Whitesnake album, he appears courtesy of this record company. And of course, the record companies are thrilled to get their name on other labels in the credits. So that could be part. I don't know how the business worked at the time with that, but it's great. I mean, as a fan, that's the kind of record I would want to buy. Remember when we were younger?
Yeah.
You throw Care to the Wind. I love this band. I've never heard this record. I'm buying it, and you just listen to it.
Well, you might buy it too, in part because you already know the 1 or 2 well-established bands, and then you're like, well, this other stuff, it must be good if they're on there as well.
Yeah. And then, I mean, look, as you said earlier today, discovering bands, how did we do it? It was a mixture of things, but the compilations, even the compilation records, it's like, wow, this, I've never heard of this band, but this song is like, with Accept, I really liked Screaming for a Love Bite was on that album. Okay. And that was the B side. I think Metal Heart was on A, but I liked that song so much. And, that prompted me to buy their record.
Yeah. Fast as a Shark was on Metal Killers Collection, Volume 1.
Okay.
And I think that may have been the first Accept song that I heard. Pretty soon after that, I had Balls to the Wall, and I started buying other Accept stuff. But that was, those collections. And interestingly too, a lot of those collections did not sell well. I would often get them in the bargain bin at Target in cassette form.
That's right. The cutouts, right? They would, like, with the have the cutout to like bargain bin. Yeah, of course.
That's actually how I got. This is a total side note here, and then let's open this up for questions and all that. AC/DC's Flick of the Switch, really, really good album, got panned,
Totally.
And it was in part because AC/DC had done such great stuff before that, and Flick of the Switch was trying to return to a more raw sound. I thought it was excellent. I got it for like $1.99 at Target, and then, played it. And I remember people at school were like, oh, you got the one AC/DC album that's no good, and I was like, you're full of it,
That's right. Yeah. You know what? That's true. And that's, talk about courage to go to school. But we always talk about that, right? Don't wear the wrong metal shirt. And then the punks versus the metalheads. And
yeah.
But like, there's to say, I really like this album. Oh, that's the dumb one. That's the one we don't like. And that was a very good album.
I had a guy who did that actually, and he was somebody who I thought was full of crap anyway. I used to bring my boombox to school, and I had Judas Priest's Sin After Sin, which I also bought in a bargain rack down in spring break in Florida. And he's like, "Oh, you got the one Judas Priest album that sucks," and I was like, "This doesn't suck." But I think a lot of it is you know, like people had their fixed ideas, you know, and
Right.
then they just kind of ran with them. But let's open this
Yeah.
up to any further questions or discussion. I want to be respectful of people's time. We're getting close to an hour and a half already. Um, any other topics? You know, you heard me mention, or Scott mention a band, and you're like, well, who are those guys? You know, or I mean, until then, I'll actually make one recommendation. There is a band out there called Sinner, and it included Herman Frank, who is later going to go to Accept. By the way, Herman Frank is putting out some really, really great stuff from like 2016 on. Every year he's putting out a great classic album. But it was formed by this vocalist and bassist, Matt Sinner, who then later on is going to join Primal Fear. So if you
Oh yeah.
know later metal, you know, and you like stuff that sounds a lot like Judas Priest, Primal Fear is that band. Sinner consistently put out some great albums. Wild and Evil in 82, Fast Decision in 83, Danger Zone 84, Touch of Sin 85, Coming Out Fighting in 86. And these were all on Noise Records. You can't actually get the albums as such on Apple Music, but you can get a compilation of like the best of the Noise record years. So that's, you know, if you want one obscure German band to listen to, that might be the one. But here we go. Mark says, first thing I'm doing after this is looking up Trance.
Nice.
They're good. I was pretty impressed with the stuff. Cacumen, not so much, you know. Chris has got a thing about German doom metal from this year that he's giving us a link to here.
And that's a good question about the Scorpions.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
I
do
saw
you know
them
anything?
years ago, but they weren't touring an album. They were just on tour playing. I mean, what was the one with the 90s one is the last one I remember with
well, they've put out some albums since then. I wonder how much COVID has thrown a monkey wrench, not just into touring, but even album production. Because so for, you know, a lot of these guys in these bands,
right,
they're living in different areas. They can't easily get together to jam, start working on album ideas, practice, then get into the studio. But now that we have vaccination, I think there's going to be a lot of not only resumption of tours, which is very important, is making money for these fans,
of
right?
course.
Because they're not making a ton of money on albums. But yeah, we should probably see a lot of new albums coming out, I imagine.
Well,
Mark said, oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
sorry, I just want to something you said that's very important. There's the new way of making records, which is, you know, I'll play a guitar part with a click track, send it to you, you add your bass.
Right.
But you're talking about the way these bands record, and you can tell that they're playing together. You know, you can tell that they're the bass player and the drummer have worked together for years. And like Joe Walsh says, like, now nobody's testifying. You know, Joe Walsh is like, the old records, we love like the way all these bands did these records because they played at the same time.
Yeah.
And there was a certain energy in the room, and you record the basics and maybe fix the vocals. But I think it's important what you said, because I think bands like the Scorpions aren't going to be into, okay, well, send it to Klaus or send it to, you know, and then like, you know, they were very much the process back then was you get into a room and, well, what if we added this part? Or and they would discuss it. So what you're saying actually for these classic bands is the process that they're used to with 2-inch tape, no digital. I mean, look, 70s and 80s and even part of the 90s, you had to play it right. There was no digital editing. There was no auto tune. There was no, your performance was your performance.
Yeah.
So I think this is the process that we enjoy in the old record.
You know, I think too that, so you like look at how bands start up new projects, right? Accept got back together because this is in the early 2000s. Wolf Hoffman and Peter Baltes were like, let's just hang out, we'll drink some beers and jam, and then they're like, oh, maybe this could turn into an album. you know? And apparently like Udo and Peter Baltes were doing some stuff fairly recently, like before COVID started.
Oh, wow.
And so that could turn into something, who knows, Herman Frank has been, like I mentioned, turning out some really great stuff recently
That's
as well.
cool.
Yeah. And so there's that. And then there's like, some of the like really big festivals. Those are also occasions where bands will try out new songs or
Right.
they'll make connections, right? They're walking around and they meet up with old bandmates and they're like, hey, should we try this? Or let's bring up this guy on stage or something like that. So I think as things open up, we'll see more of that happen again. We're kind of in a situation where everything's on hiatus, right? Until that happens. Mark has a good question for you, Scott. What do you think of bands like Scorpions re-recording old material? Do you think it improves the song quality? What do you think?
Well, my take is this. So like, let's say, for example, by the way, a lot of bands re-record stuff because they've lost the rights to the album.
Oh,
but they still own their publishing. So like Great White did the first album again because the record company said, we have 100% of the sales, you signed it away. So Great White records as close as they can 30 years later, their first album. So with the Scorpions, my take on it is, if they were to try to do Blackout now, it wouldn't be the same because that album was recorded. I think of it as a screenshot of that part of your life, and you capture it on an album, and you get 10 years wiser, maybe, but the young, what do you call, like getting, the attitude, like, maybe you've
the being hungry too,
being hungry. And it's kind of like, you could play the parts, but it's not going to sound like when you were 18 because you're not 18 anymore. And so I don't think, and not to say like we don't want a live album of them doing the classics, but to go in and actually try to recreate the record. Well, technology's changed. The circumstances were what they were. We joke about the White Lion album, Pride, how it sounded like it was recorded in a trash can, but the songs were so good. I listened to it all the time when I was younger. But like, if they went and said, oh, we're going to do like a really good version of it, well, that was the version. That's what it is. So as far as bands re-recording albums so they make money from the sales, that makes sense. But for me, it's not Blackout era anymore. That's 40 years ago almost. And that album, you can't do it again. I mean, you could play the parts, but you're a different person. So I love, Chris, I love that question. Actually, Mark, I'm sorry. I love that question a lot because I think about that often. It's kind of like, I've heard some of these bands, I'm like, but it doesn't give me that same, when the song was brand new at the time, right? Scorpions are like excited, like we got this new album, Blackout, and this great song, and they're so psyched to be in the studio. Now they've been on the road for 40 years playing that album, going, so we're gonna play it again, I guess.
I think there's some challenges too with some of the bands where you don't have the same players. You have some of the main players, but you don't have like the same drummer or
good point,
bassist or rhythm guitarist.
It's true, and you don't have the same gear. That gear is probably long gone. And this is just, from an artistic perspective, it's kind of like, going to an actor, going to Jodie Foster when she was in Taxi. Well, why did you do that again? Not a 16-year-old girl anymore,
Yeah. That'd be kind of funny to put together like a classic movie with all these old people, doing their lines again,
Yeah.
I'll mention something too. So, and then we'll take Chris's question. Andy and I got to see Udo and Accept the same year. Udo was at the Chance in Poughkeepsie, which is it's like a bar that's also got a big, stage and stuff, but it's pretty small, pretty intimate. And then we saw Accept with Raven down at the Gramercy in New York City, also a fairly small venue, you know,
Yeah.
but with seating and stuff like that. And it was very interesting to see these two bands led by, you know, members who are very original, very much part of the thing, playing the same songs and doing their own thing with it. Obviously, the singers, you know, Mark Tornillo and Udo sound quite different. Udo had surrounded himself with some really amazing talent, young guys, you know, in their 20s and 30s, who were doing a great job, and could do like the sounding like the classic, Accept.
Wow.
But you know, some of the same songs, Balls to the Wall, they both did that, you know. Fast as a Shark, they both did that, you know.
Right.
And it was interesting to compare the two, you know.
Yeah, I would love to see both of those too. And well, you got the Udo's voice, which is so important,
and his stage presence. He, you know, there's some people who are really performers, you know, like Udo, Brian James Dio, Bruce Dickinson.
Oh, yeah.
You know, even some who are kind of idiosyncratic, like Richie Blackmore, right? I mean, Richie Blackmore scowls at people. He's not going to engage with the audience, but that's his shtick, right?
He's grumpy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or another great person is with massive stage presence, Dee Snider, you know. Think about him.
Right.
Well, let's take Chris's question. Any comment on the genre term krautrock? And he's got a reference here to In Trance, which the entry in Wikipedia says that the Scorpions were moving away from their earlier krautrock thing. And I don't know these music genres myself quite so well.
Kraut is in the derogatory term for German.
So it links to this saying a broad genre of experimental rock, artists blending elements of psychedelic rock, electronic music, and avant-garde composition, among other courses. I mean, I don't think that Lonesome Dove or the one that I just mentioned right after it actually fit that. If electronic music is supposed to be part of it, Lonesome Dove is, you know, it's the psychedelic stuff is there. But they're not using like, you know, a lot of keyboard stuff or Fly to the Rainbow. Yeah, it's more like the Scorpions are developing out of a jazzy, mixing psychedelic stuff along with a heavier and heavier sound. But you know, I think if I remember right, a lot of the krautrock stuff, weren't they singing more in German than in English?
You got me. I mean, this is a new term for me. But no, I have the thing open. I'm reading and listening to you.
Yeah.
Interesting. And that what a classic album cover. That's Uli's guitar. I don't know if anybody's looking at the link, but the woman on the cover, that's Uli John Roth's guitar.
Yeah.
I think they say it's a Strat. Oh yeah, it's a 70 Strat. You can tell by it's been doctored a little, but so that was 76. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
All right. Wow.
Well, I mean, we could talk about like broader German music. We did that a bit already in terms of like the choice to use English being
right.
part of. I guess you could say that, you know, German heavy metal, by being heavy metal. Well, you know, and we also said too, like probably until late 70s, they're not conceptualizing themselves as heavy metal. They're just conceptualizing themselves as heavier and heavier and harder stuff. That's rock, you know, rock and roll, as Klaus Meine would say. And you know, not doing things the way that a more specifically German orientation would be. You know, I mean, a lot of German pop is just in German. You know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I mean, I should say though, there's quite a few other German bands that are doing stuff in English. You think about Fury and the Slaughterhouse. Mm-hmm. They'd be an example. They chose to. I think they did do some stuff in German though too.
Well, you know, we were talking yesterday that the one time it was cool when in the early 80s that German singer Nina did 9
Balloons.
But then it was so successful they put out the German version of it.
Oh,
And
is that the story that the English version preceded the German version?
in this country it did.
Oh, okay. I get it. Yeah.
In this country it did. And then it was so popular, it was kind of cool if you knew how to like say it in German. So I remember they released the 45 and the people in school would be like, I have the German version. Like that was like kind of a badge of honor at the time.
Here's a really great question from Chris.
Oh.
What is the most iconic Scorpion song? Rock You Like a Hurricane. So it depends on which Scorpions you're into.
But
If you're, I think for a lot of people, and it's not a song I actually like, Winds of Change, right?
really,
That's the Scorpions that everybody knows across the world, and they were part of a really important historical moment.
right.
I'm not really that into that stuff. Rock You Like a Hurricane, that's definitely one that I think you could say is iconic in that way. The Zoo got a lot of radio airplay in the 80s. You know, that riff, you know, dun 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 dun, you know, dun dun. I think there's a lot of people who know how to play that one. What else? I mean, if it was the early Scorpions, probably Speedy's Coming.
The early era, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that
got a lot of radio airplay too.
Those are completely different eras of the band.
Although I like them both, you know.
No, of course, they're amazing. I'll say something unpopular, but I really love Savage Amusement.
Okay.
I thought the songs were fantastic. Don't Stop at the Top, the album opens with. And I just think
the Rhythm of Love was getting a lot of airplay off of that one, right?
That was the hit.
Yeah.
And I remember I bought that tape that year, and everybody was going back to, you know, people say, you got the stupid album, that's the worst one, you know, like,
yeah.
And, I remember that summer it was just on repeat in my car. Of course, Worldwide Live is my go-to.
Yeah, I mean,
like Coming Home, that's a great opener. And then
Coming Home is off of Love at First Sting, right?
Yes.
Or isn't it? Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. Big City Nights too.
Oh God.
That's another one.
You know what? That one is up there for me.
Yeah. I mean, Blackout got a lot of airplay. Dynamite, another really big one. Well, I mean, we should also, we could also say, I think for some people, the ballads, right? Still Loving You, Holiday,
which is an older one.
When the Smoke Is Coming Down.
No One Like You. That's a good one, Mark.
Oh, yeah. That's off of Blackout too, right?
Great song. Oh yeah, and it's still, it's great as we still hear it on the radio. It's and when it comes on, like the guitar is so great.
Yeah, you could, if you were going to do Name That Tune, right? You could just hear that one single guitar note played that way, and you'd be like, No One Like You,
That's right. Yeah, you can name that in one note.
Yeah.
Old show. So, oh God, but like when Worldwide Live came out, that was 85 also. I still have my copy. It's warranted to hell. It's just, I played it so much, but I used to crank it up and, or put it in headphones if it was late and just,
I'm going to tell a story, and then Scott will maybe tell another story, and then we'll bring it to a close here. I had a boombox that had the cassette player that could like switch back and forth, like you play the whole tape. And I had a 45-minute tape with Love at First Sting on one side and Blackout on the other side. And I would go to sleep with that. That was my go to sleep music. And some people, that's so hard and heavy, but actually the Scorpions are so melodic, even when they are being dissonant and stuff like that. I found it was like my soporific. I would plug that in, and usually I would start on the Love at First Sting side. And then, if I made it to Blackout, I would just sit there in the dark and listen to it and slowly drift off. I couldn't do that with other things like say Iron Maiden or Dio or Judas Priest, but the Scorpions I could definitely do that with.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're right about the melodic part, but I think we discussed this in the past. It's kind of I could with Iron Maiden. Um, I could with something that's kind of like, well, meditation's about calmness and quiet, but I think with maybe we should talk about like, what metalheads have in common, why we have such an emotional response. Well, a lot of times I don't find it as aggressive. I find it as occupying my racing mind, maybe when I was in high school, right? I was worrying about so much. And if I put that on, I had a focus. And it was like it quiet my mind and I could fall asleep, although I'm
Yeah.
music. And I so you had the auto reverse one.
That's what it was called. Right. Auto reverse. Yeah. See, I was doing the Klaus Meine thing. What is that thing where the tape, it goes both sides? And
right. No, I mean, Cheap Trick live at Budokan was one of them. I used to go to sleep to it, but I always had the tape recorder next to my bed, and I'd have some, I go to sleep to something always. I mean, we had the 90-minute tapes for this, 45 minutes aside, like Greg's saying. So you'd have an hour and a half, but I guess yours kept going back and forth.
Yeah, unless I'd like wake up and then hit stop or
Right.
something like that. I mean, if it was with batteries, of course, it would run down pretty quick.
Right.
But usually I had it plugged in.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
Mark says something really funny here. This is a good thing to go out on.
It is
heavy metal ASMR, Yeah, it was kind of like that, And what Scott was saying, in a way, the not aggressivity, but the hardness, the heaviness of the stuff. For some of us, that was not off-putting. It would kind of suck you in and calm you down and cool you off, in different ways. Maybe something to explore in another discussion. So
yeah, that's how I view it anyway.
Yeah. Any last words, Scott, that you want to say? Or
I really enjoyed this session. Greg brought this topic up, and it's something that I didn't actually consider. And of course, him and I do some trading as far as check this band out, check out this, and we get these cool discussions. So I'm always excited to kind of learn a little more, hear some new bands, and then kind of consider it makes you reevaluate the history of music. Where did this come from? Even down to the story, the cool story that Greg said about Udo and Dio hanging out. It's kind of like, well, now this is coming together even more. So I think these are, as far as I'm concerned, very important discussions about, stuff we didn't know from back in the day. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And I'm not sure what we're going to do for next session, but we'll figure it out by the next month from now. And we will hit the other German stuff and other European stuff down the line as well. So have a great day, everybody. Good evening to Mark. Good
Mark,
afternoon to everybody else.
Everyone. Yeah.